We have a rainy day here in Denton. My name is Paula McCain. I'm a recovery business advisor for North Central Texas Small Business Development Center. Today is National Black Cat Appreciation Day and National Thrift Shop Day, so I'm a little torn. I don't know which one to celebrate. The SBDC is a leading provider of assistance for small businesses. We are grant funded, and because of that, we can offer these webinars to you and other services at no cost. Welcome to Money Smart Startup Businesses Part 1. We have Rebecca Schultz here going to present this to us. We're really excited. It's a new series. Rebecca has been helping business owners to access money and financial education for many years. She is the founder and executive loan consultant of Centerlock Funding. Thank you for joining us today, Rebecca.
You guys, I can't wait to have this conversation because it is really near and dear to my heart. I'm going to take you guys on a journey, and it's one that I feel like will connect all the dots that are left unconnected when business owners are learning how to, one, identify a strong business cash flow, as well as start to scale it up. So we're going to bridge this conversation, but I liken it to group therapy. So if you've attended prior conversations with me, we're going to treat this one just a little bit different. All right. I want it to be a conversation among friends. All right. Before it was put your questions in the chat box, and at the end we'll address the questions. This is a little different style, right? So I'm going to present the informations in a form of questions. And what you'll be doing on the other end of that is you'll be writing down those questions, and then hopefully over the next week, we'll meet in about a week, right? You'll start to answer those questions, and then series 2 or part 2 is going to build up and take you to a different level, right? So it's going to be building upon prior week's activity, but you're going to be doing some quiet contemplation, right? Answering these questions that are posed so that you can get the full benefit out of the discussion. All right. The end result is what we would consider a forecast, right? As well as a dashboard, a financial dashboard. If you don't know what that is now, don't worry. We will talk about that in detail. Right? It's all going to be customized to what you're trying to achieve. But we're going to take you down this journey where you'll actually have a plan pulled together. Does that sound fair? We're good? All right. So let's get started. One moment. I'm going to bring up the presentation. Okay, it's now letting me do that. All right, so we're at Money Smart for Startups. My name is Rebecca Schultz. I am the founder and executive loan consultant for Centerlock, and I have this really cool job. I get to talk about money, right? And not only do I get to talk about money, but I get to help people find money and use it to the best of our ability to achieve their goals. Right? It's a responsibility like a superpower, and I don't take it lightly. All right. So you're going to see a little bit of the superpower today and going forward over the next 3 weeks. I do partner with the Small Business Development Centers here in North Texas Small Business Development Center because I feel like that is a group of individuals that are good at what they do, they're passionate about what they do, and they complement the information and the work that I do so that you can actually keep working on it, build upon it, right, in a network or support system that will take you farther than what I can do on my own. Right, so I love quotes, and this one just really struck me for the conversation. Whenever you see a successful business, someone once made a courageous decision. Okay, so if you think about that, right, all of us can think back in our minds about a successful business owner. Right, as you are launching, or maybe this is not your first business, you have multiple businesses, think about the guts, right, the hard work and determination that it takes in order to build a successful business. It is not for the faint of heart, okay? But you have to know where you want to go in order for you to get there, correct? So the conversation we're having today is really identifying where we want to go, right? Thinking about it. I have a friend of mine named John Whaley. He calls himself Johnny Profit. He talks about playing the Netflix video of your business success in your mind, and then we're going to re-engineer that from the ground up. All right, and so this is a little part of that going forward. All right, so the first section that we're going to talk about today, part one, is about what you are trying to build. You cannot be successful if you don't know or understand what success means to you. Now, the same way I say that, success is going to look different to every one of us, right? It's this really cool, interesting conversation where one size doesn't fit all. You might want to be bought out by some gigantic company, and that's what you find successful. You might just want to make a profit and be a very small business and not hire any employees because, quite frankly, they might be overrated to you, okay? Different versions, right? But as long as you know what you want to be, right? You identify it, then you can build it. So what are you trying to build? All right, so our learning objectives for the conversation today is understanding and articulating startup revenue model. All right, now we're starting to get into some banker lingo. So I promise that I will break this down and make it very digestible, but we need to understand what our revenue model is. All right, how are we going to make money? And we're going to identify key revenue assumptions for our new business. Now, revenue assumptions, or assumptions in its name, is just guesses, right? So when we're thinking about what we're building, we're going to make some guesses on how much money it's going to bring us. And we'll talk about how we do that in a safe way, right? And then we're going to evaluate and determine quality expense structures for the operations. Right now, depending on your vision, what you want to create, there's going to be expense models around it. And we're going to talk about that in great detail. And more importantly, remember, this is a group conversation, or we'll call it group therapy. This is group money therapy. Right? We're going to talk about how we validate those expenses to really know whether or not we've identified everything that's out there and that we're preparing ourselves in the right way. And then we're going to start being introduced to economic forecasting resources. All right, so I like to think about it this way. Like we're all pretty smart, right? But there are some really smart people out there, and all they do is they think about our economic forecast, right? We call those economists, right? And so there are ways that we tap into that information and compare it against our knowledge or the information we're receiving, and we can make some sound guesses. Right, that helps us in that whole valuation of the expense structure and that revenue conversation. We're going to learn to utilize those ourselves. And then we're going to take a little time and we're going to talk about process mapping tools. Process mapping. All right, so that's a more technical term, but when I break it down for you, you're going to understand it, and it's just basic common sense. All right, and we got to think about some of these things that we're building in that common sense ground, like the individual building blocks of what we're trying to create. So we're going to break it down into some process mapping tools. And then we're going to construct that cash flow model. Now, that's more of a conversation we're going to continue on through part 2 and part 3, right? But we're going to begin to understand this cash flow projection model. Like, what is all about that cash flow projection? How do we actually start doing that? And then we'll provide you with some tools down the road so that it'll make it really easy for you to come up with a strong cash flow projection for your vision, right? And then finally, we're going to talk about developing a strong and sound board for feedback. And that's part of what we're doing today. And through the next 3 sessions is we're going to help be that sounding board for ideas or questions in this context of building a strong financial business, right? Where it's got its structure, its bones, and it can make money. All right. So remember, there's no question too small, no question too big that the group can't try to digest and support each other with. Now, I represent some information in this conversation, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I know it all because that would be just a lie. Okay. And every one of us in this group has got some type of insight or experience that might be a benefit to somebody else. So we're going to tap on that sounding board, right? That collective knowledge as we move through these 3 classes. All right, sound good? Let's move on. All right, so the first step, right, in understanding on what you're trying to build is understanding incoming cash flow. Now, I follow this guy. His name is Ken Honda. All right, and you can look that up, Ken Honda. Honda like the car. All right. And he talks about money as being like energy, right? Or you could liken it to water, right? So you need it to grow and prosper. You need water to be able to function, right? But too much water can build a flood, right? Too little water can build or can lead to a drought, right? So we need the right flow. All right, so when we're talking about incoming cash flow, we're talking about that water coming to us or that source of goodness coming to us, right? And then there's an outgoing, right? Just like a tide, an outgoing cash flow, and those are going to be our expenses. So we're going to separate this conversation for now, and we're going to think about the money that's going to be coming to us in this incoming cash flow. All right, now before we go really too deep, I just want to get a poll. Remember I asked you guys about successful businesses. You're supposed to envision one that you really aspire to, right? I want you to name that successful small business that you admire. Now, remember, you don't have to go to the chat box. If you're more comfortable with that, I'm not going to take it away from you. It's like a security blanket. But if you want to just unmute yourself and just name out a successful small business that you admire, let's go ahead and get people's visions of what they're trying to look up to, like role models that they're using for their entrepreneurship journey. Any ideas? Anybody wants to share? I know I'm forcing you guys to get uncomfortable. You'll get
Uh,
used to it. Go ahead.
um, I'd say it's not small. It's pretty large. It's Costco.
Okay. I'm a Costco goer too. I was there yesterday, Joel. I love them. What about Costco makes them successful in your eyes?
I, it's just 2 things that I've noticed. It's really good employee maintenance in regards to how they treat their employees and pay, and really how organized and structured they are in regards to their prices and how they structure their stores. That's pretty much it.
I love that. I love that you care about the employees because I do too. That's a big factor for having a successful business. All right, who else? feel like I've stumped you guys. Well, I'll share mine. All right. So I have a friend. He's actually my friend, and I feel like he's wildly successful. But it goes back to something that Joel noticed too, and it's that employee conversation, right? Right away, he was different from other business owners because he put the employees, uh, I guess you would say, happiness ahead of his own. Right, and you feel it when you walk in that door. Right, the funny little story is, I was told by another banker that I needed to go visit this guy because what he had created in the middle of a low economic area was phenomenal. What he didn't tell me is that the place looked scary from the outside. So I drove up and I didn't even want to get out of the car. I was like, I don't know, this doesn't look like a safe neighborhood. And I was like, but I trust Pete. And Pete said I needed to go in. And so, boy, I sucked it up. I got out of my car, locked it right after I got out, ran inside. And when I opened the door, it was like a mecca for just this diverse student population. They were all sitting down studying together. It was a coffee shop, and there was just such a beautiful like environment around it. I would have never guessed that this existed within this particular area. And then as I got to become friends with the business owner, I understand like his whole focus is not about making money. Okay, although we are in Money Smarts, we're talking about making money. It's more about making sure that his employees have a well-balanced life, right? And so he wants them to work, but he wants them to be happy at work. And that comes through whenever you're actually receiving the services, right? And just being in that environment. It's very transparent. So I would say in my eyes, that would be a successful small business. Okay, so we're going to move on. All right. Just remember, this is how the format goes. I'm going to ask you another question coming up. Do not be afraid to share. It makes it much, much more fun when we share. Okay. Okay, so it's kind of hard to see this, but how will your business make money? This is the number one question I want you guys to answer for yourself. Like, how do you plan to make money? And it sounds trivial, right? But I'm going to tell you it's not. It's not trivial. There's a lot to just answering that question. So the basics I want you to go over is, what does the payment process look like from the end user? Right, so if I were to walk into Deepak's cafe, right? Remember the Mecca in the middle of nowhere? And I were to go up as an end user, what's my experience? What does that look like? Is it easier to get the services or the goods from them? How do I pay for that good or service? How do I give you feedback as a business owner, whether or not I had a good experience, right? Will I come back? And how important is it that that client come back often, right? Reoccurring sales. How that looks, like that basic question has a lot of depth to it that you need to process. Right, next, you really don't have something until you've tested it, right? You remember, like, if you're going to any type of cooking place, they always want you to test the samples, right? Is it good? You really don't know if the process is going to work unless you've tested it out and you've gotten some measure of feedback. So I want you guys, as you are thinking about that payment process, how you attract money, right? How it comes to you, how that interaction happens, what you do in order to keep that transaction going, if there's a life cycle in that. You got to test it and then get feedback at every point in order for you to know if you need to improve it, right? I feel like so many business owners, they have an idea of what they want to do, but they haven't thought through the end user experience on how that translates to making money. And when you start again backwards, right? You re-engineer it. You have the ability to be thoughtful about that and then make it easy to collect your money and make it easy for people to come back and make it easy for people to want to share and refer you, right? People who think about it from the end, re-engineer it, have a better process. So test it out. And answers to these questions really start you on the road of understanding incoming cash flow, the money coming to you. There are certain businesses that have done a really good job getting very specific and asking a lot of questions and getting really interested in that process, that once they have improved the process, it's almost like they can't turn off the faucet, right? And that becomes a whole nother problem. We talked about the flood. Right now, as we're getting started, we just want to make sure we've got some water, right? We just want some cash flow. We want the money coming in. All right, moving on. So one of the basics is pricing. We want to make sure that you understand what your pricing looks like, right? Like how are, oh, sorry. I was trying to move your screen. Uh, Sorry, guys. Pricing is important. So how do you know if you're selling at a good price? All right, so anybody throw it out there. How would you know if you're selling at a good price?
Look at the competition.
Competition pricing, that's fantastic, right? What if they buy or they don't buy? That might tell us something too. Um, there's a lot to making sure that you're selling at a good price, right? There's price sensitivity, right? Some people might say, I'm willing to pay $5 for that cup of coffee, but the minute you go to 5.50, I'm out, right? That's too much. So is there price sensitivity to what you're trying to sell or the products that you're giving? Competition. Competition is wildly interesting, right? Competition comes in many different forms, right? You can even be competing against not doing something, right? Like not having a solution can become competition, which is crazy to me. But you really need to understand what that competition looks like and drill into it. Did you know that the Small Business Development Center has a fantastic library resource that can help you access certain tools that will drive or drill into the competition process and give you more information about your competition than you possibly thought was available? That can actually set you up for really good pricing structure, right? Or if you are looking at process and you want to like compare your process against your competitor's process, and maybe you have an advantage just in the process conversation that we were talking about, right? You have those type of resources available at your fingertips. You just have to ask for them and then take the information and contemplate it. All right, so market research is what we just talked about, as well as competition. And then there's market substitutes. All right, so I think of substitutes like whenever I go to the dairy aisle of my grocery store. Okay, I shop at HEB. So I go to the dairy aisle and I feel like there's oat milk, there's banana milk, there's rice milk. I don't know. They're coming out with a new nut milk almost like every week, it feels, right? So there are substitutes. And if you think that that's the only area that there's substitutes, you're wrong, right? Substitutes are coming out everywhere. They now call them interruptions, right? Like, are you a business interrupter? Are you an industry disruptor? It's a very interesting conversation, but think about it, right? Like, is there a substitute, or could maybe one of your competitors, or maybe even not even a direct competitor, a distant competitor, come up with something that could offset it, right? You have to think about those aspects when you're thinking about pricing. And then, of course, innovation. Innovation is so key, right? And it's not just innovating your product or your sales, it's innovating your process, it's innovating your communication to your customers or clients. Innovation takes on a whole new life. It's almost just an infinity of possibilities there. So I know that I give lots of broad information, right? But this whole group is about taking this information and understanding it individually. So did anything about pricing really get to somebody or stick out? Or maybe they leave this conversation on pricing more confused than they started it. This is your time to speak up.
Rebecca, you asked the question, how do you know if your product is priced correctly? One
Correct.
response is if it's selling. And another response is if you need to restock the item a lot more often than others.
I like that. I like that. That's a great idea. And how would you know if you needed to restock it if it's not available, right?
Mhm.
How would you know? Maybe that would be
Okay, I didn't
feedback.
understand the question. How would you know to restock it if it's not available?
Correct. So if how would you know that people would buy more if you had more? So maybe that's
Mm,
communication with the customers or the clients, feedback, reviews, some way to capture that information to know that the market is larger. Oh, I
Um,
can. Nosa says if she has backup orders. I just saw that.
mhm.
Yes, I love it. Exactly right. Exactly right. Right. So we start to get into the conversation where if you know there's a market and the market is willing to buy, right, and then you've got backup orders or a waiting list of some sort, then you start focusing on how much will they buy and how quickly can I get it so that I can translate it to sales, right? And so we're gonna get to that in a moment, Nasa, because that's a really good conversation. And that's part of adjusting our process to incoming cash flow. We need to be there to collect it, right? And so we need to put into place the pieces that will help us both take advantage of the opportunity, right? Buy more product to sell, as well as be able to make sure that we're making enough profit on it so that we're getting what's actually due to us and it makes sense for the overall vision. That actually becomes part of our cash flow reviews to make sure that we're actually being profitable. And as we're comparing prices to our competition, we're actually lining up our dominoes to where we're taking advantage of all the possibilities. There's a way to actually measure that. Okay. All right, let's dive into the next conversation. Okay, so I like to help people understand that although competition and pricing, it sounds like you're like positioning yourself for the right sale, right? And there's a lot to that, right? We want to be in the position to make money and make sure that we've got a strong offering for the product or service that's being out there. But I don't want people to ever underestimate their own energy and ability to drive sales to themselves, right? We often think of just marketing and SEO and all these things about driving us business. But I'm going to just point ahead of that conversation. There's actually that person that's really communicating, sending out the messaging, right? Really setting the goals, defining what that successful business is. And so I want people to understand that you are the driver of that business, right? You are the one setting the goals that has the vision of what you're trying to accomplish, right? And so that helps define how you market a business. It helps you be able to structure the conversation, but you are the driving force. If you're going to accomplish something, you're going to be the one to do it more so than just having a product at a good price. Right. So think about that. I could be in the middle of the desert with my stand selling, fruit, fresh fruit for 10 cents, right? A record deal, but I may have nobody come, right? I would really have to define and position myself in a way that allowed for that business to flow through. So you're the driving force. What you decide you're going to do is essentially going to lead that business forward, keep it stuck in the mud, or have it not go. All right, so be the leader and determine how much cash flow you need or what cash flow is in that market. There's some research that can help you with that to understand how big that market is, what you're trying to attract. But you want to also reevaluate your activities, right? So if things aren't working, if I'm selling that fruit in the middle of the desert, maybe I need to reevaluate tomorrow, right? Not go do that again. And then maybe I need to communicate more, right? Maybe that's part of your marketing is you're going to communicate differently. But at the end of the day, you're the one doing all of this. How many people agree? Okay. Yeah. So think about that, right? Like, so what would that successful driver be doing, right? What does that successful driver need to do, or at least have done for them by maybe hiring outside individuals? that's a question that you want to ask yourself and to determine, is that all you, or do you need other skill sets, other people that come and complement you, right? But at the end of the day, you're in charge. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about assumptions. Now, I'm going to break down assumptions in our part 2. All right, because I had to hit you with this twice, because I think by the second time I present the information, you'll start to connect the pieces. Okay, so you will not hear the last from me on this conversation, but it all starts with guesses. It all starts with these assumptions. So when you're thinking about your successful business that you're going to have, right, or how successful you're going to be, what would you expect to sell? Like, how much sales or transactions do you need to be as successful as what you're envisioning? Now, I want you to like backtrack through that, right? And you need to divide that out. And the reason why we're doing this is because it's your roadmap to your leadership, to that driving force. All right, so how many transactions per day? All right, so think about your success and break it down. What would you be considered successful? How many transactions a day? How many transactions per week, per month, quarter, per year, right? And remember, it builds upon it till you get to your end goal. Now, the reason why you have to digest it, it's like how you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time, is because that is how you're going to start to understand your cash flow projections. It all goes together. Now, if you're going to do this correctly, all right, when you're thinking about your guesses or your assumptions and you're just starting out, blank sheet of paper, I want you to do is literally write this stuff out, right? What is your vision of a successful business? Write it out. And how are you going to get there, right? How many transactions is it going to take per day, per week, per month, per quarter to get to where you want to be? And that's going to be your leadership roadmap. And then you're going to translate that into a forecast. But you have to start out with understanding in writing your written assumptions. Okay. Now, cash flow. Cash flow is, well, it's different for every person, right? And when you get this, and oftentimes people fall over this early on in business, and it's about the second year they start figuring it out, right? So now hopefully I'm going to save you from making those mistakes. You got to think about how much money you're going to need to operate, right? And we break that down, and we'll talk more about that in just a second, into expenses, both fixed and variable, right? So fixed and variable. An idea of a fixed expense would be rent, right? If you were required to have rent, or if that was something you absolutely had in order to have that vision of that business, right, then that would be a fixed expense. Variable expense could be like employee wages, right? Maybe you're going to reduce their hours, increase their hours. Either way, that's going to flex with you, right? So think about how you're going to collect money to pay those fixed and variable expenses. Now, you have power here in this conversation, right? Because you're directing to those clients or customers, those future clients or customers. You're thinking about how you're going to structure your cash flow, right? We're doing this ahead of time. So do you need to collect all your money up front before you provide your goods or services? Maybe, maybe not, right? Do you want to collect a partial sale, a deposit of some sorts up front? How long is that cash flow cycle that you're going to be looking at? Do you get paid the same day, as soon as you perform the service or provide the good? Or is that something that you're going to have to bill over time, right? And then what do those expenses, fixed and variable, look at over time? So you need to think about your cash flow cycle ahead of actually putting the communication out there, or even deciding how much you're going to spend or make, right? This is all very important information. And the next thing I want you to think about is, does the sale process reoccur, right? Is it a one-time sale? Do they just come in when they're going through that desert once? You're rarely going to see that person come back a second time. You're going to treat that client very different from what you're going to treat somebody that comes in maybe daily, once a week, right? So what does that look like? Now your marketing and your communication to individuals that are reoccurring, that's going to look differently, as well as overall that cash flow cycle, right? You can predict it better if you have a reoccurring cash flow cycle. So I want you to think about your assumptions, right? Remember, checking back in, you're going to get a clean piece of paper and you're just going to start answering these questions. What do you expect to sell? How much? How often are you going to sell that? What's the price you're going to collect? Right? What does that cash flow cycle look like? Do you get paid right away, over time? Right? And does this process reoccur? Right? And if it does reoccur, when do you find that to what is that time frame? Right? Because what's going to happen is we're going to start building out that incoming cash flow model. Okay, we call those revenue assumptions. All right, so you're writing it down. Now, the next step is I want you to think about others. All right, now everybody around you, including in this group, has information that they can share. All right, so get feedback from others. What are you missing? What did you not think about? Right? Ironically, I find businesses that surround themselves with different industries, we call that a non-homogeneous networking group. Okay, that means they're not all in the same industry. You've got different perspectives of business that might give you different ways to look at accomplishing a goal or solving a problem. So when you surround yourself with feedback from different areas, different environments, that actually can be even more helpful, right? That actually can help you see things that you might not have already seen, right? And then you want to ask the question, are your assumptions reasonable? Okay. Is this something that you can really rely on? Are you really being too optimistic, right? Entrepreneurs are optimistic by nature, right? Very different from individuals that are very, very risk adverse, right? So sometimes you need somebody who's a little more grounded, more risk adverse to jump in there and make sure that they're seeing what you're trying to accomplish and whether or not there's something out there that you really should be rethinking. Right? And then you're going to understand that you're not only going to do this for the most likely situation, right? That you want to come up with some written assumptions, written down assumptions for the best case, the worst case, and the most likely scenarios. Okay, so really good business owners do this. All right, not a lot of startups do it, but I really want you guys to do this well. So you think about what you think is most likely, right? That's the most likely scenario, right? But you always have to think about the best case and the worst case. Because let me tell you, if you don't think about the best case and you start growing super quick, right? That could be that flood that comes in and takes you under, right? Floods aren't good. We know that in Houston, by the way. Floods aren't good, but it's too much of a good thing, right? Too many cells, not enough people, not enough process can kill your business just as much as not having any cells, right? And then you got your worst case. So maybe how you're going to manage to low sales or reduce sales for a period of time. You got to think about what that looks like and what you as a manager or a leader are going to do in order to get things back on track. Right? So when you think about those scenarios as a leader, if you've already thought about it, it helps you make clear decisions and really have actions, steps that you can take to jump in and help your business. Okay, so I like doing this little check-in conversation with each other, all right? This is our check-in. What I want you to do, remember after today's conversation, I want you to think about these few little things, like how will you know, know how you will make money. There you go. How will you make money, right? Know how you're going to do that. Think about that, start to finish. Right? Make sure that you've got some strong revenue assumptions that allow for you to be a good leader. Okay? A leader knows where they're going. They're going to have people follow them when they know where they're going. You want to be that leader. Okay? Joel and I agree. One of the best attributes to a successful business is having strong employees that know what they're supposed to do. Okay? You don't get those type of people being wishy-washy. Right? And then run your 3 scenarios, your best, your worst, and your most likely. Okay, what do those look like to you? What are those assumptions? How would those change? Okay. All right, so we talked about the incoming. Now let's talk about the outgoing cash flow. All right, so you're going to answer this question. What does your outgoing cash flow look like for your business? What does that look like? Think about that. Forms of outgoing cash flow, right, can include startup costs. Right? So maybe you have license or permits, or maybe you have to invest in software, right? Maybe you've got marketing expenses. Whatever that looks like for your unique business, you want to start figuring out how much it's going to cost, right? And then you've got maybe cost of goods sold. 80% of businesses today in the current market are what we would consider service-based businesses, where there's not an actual true cost of goods sold. Okay, give you an example. If I was going to be a t-shirt retailer, I was going to buy t-shirts, right, in bulk, and then I was going to put some design on them and then resell them for a profit, right? The t-shirts, the bulk t-shirts that I buy, that's my cost of goods sold, right? Now, if I'm a massage therapist and it's just my hands, there's no cost of goods sold there, right? It's just my service. That's a service-based business. So 80% of the businesses are service-based business as opposed to cost of goods sold. But if you have cost of goods sold, right, then you need to figure out who you're going to be, your suppliers or vendors, and then what those relationships look like, how often you have to pay, is it cash on delivery, are there terms involved when you get to a certain point, are there competition, are the other vendors, what's that pricing look like, what does your process look like compared to their process, right? There's a lot in that conversation, by the way, right? And then you've got your payroll and wages. So what does that look like, right? Remember, a lot of times that's going to be your variable. You kind of need it, right? So maybe it's kind of fixed to a certain point. Maybe there's some employees that are fixed, but then that could be something that you could control. But what does that look like for you? Licensing, permits, marketing expenses. Oh my goodness, do not get me started on marketing expenses. It's one of the number one things that business owners reduce when they don't have much cash flow instead of increase, right? It's counterintuitive there, right? But you need to think about that in great depth as you're starting out. And then operating expenses, right? So rent, overhead, ongoing subscription costs. What does that look like? Utilities, and any other expenses that are unique to your vision that you're going to need. Those are all forms of outgoing cash flow that need to be identified and thought about. Right? So here's another polling question. I want to ask you guys, do you have control over your outgoing cash flow? So this is where you guys get to jump in. Remember, you can just unmute yourself and jump in. Do you have control over your outgoing cash flow?
Yes.
Okay, I like that. Thank you, Brett. Anybody else?
I'm gonna say not entirely. But like, I don't know, like in terms of, because in the midst of a pandemic, coming out of it, I've since learned anything that I thought was stable isn't really stable. You know what I mean? So although I have what most would consider like a permanent job, stable job, I don't know. That's the way, and that's how I'm thinking about the question. I don't know if it's really there if, I'm going to be out of work for X amount of time. So I think I'll say I have limited control. If I if I can create another category.
I love that. I love that so much because I'm with you there, right? I'm with you there. I feel like the answer is both yes and no, right? Like that's the truth. It's yes because you can decide where and what and when you spend money, right? But it's no in the sense that expenses are part of the business. And that type of uncertainty that you talked about, TQ, like it is definitely there, right? Like you don't know what's going to come around that. So there's a certain part of that owning a business is going to cost you money. Money is going to have to flow out. That is just how it is, right? All we can do on our end as the leaders for these business is try to anticipate it, try to see it and remember the worst case and best case and most likely case, we can try to identify it. If we can identify it, then we can have some type of idea of what to do next, right? To get around it or get ahead of it and make some changes before it takes us under. So great conversation. All right, so startup expenses. So these are just a few, right? And you guys are probably feeling these pains. And if maybe you've already gone through this stage, right? And you're just talking about ramping up. But registering the business, that's an expense. Equipment, right? Inventory, software. Can't do without software these days. Labor and talent, that's the #1 expense for most businesses, by the way. It's also the #1 need for businesses right now, right? That's why Joel and I are looking at Costco. We're like, what are you doing there, right? Something's working for you. Everything's organized. Everything's working well, right? And then working capital, that that is one of the #1 killers of businesses is not having enough working capital. But I'm going to tell you, you have control, just like we talked about, right? You have control over that. You have to identify what you need ahead of actually jumping in there and finding yourself in problems. And where are you going to get that capital? That's part of this conversation as you guys are getting out the gate. And you must identify what that company needs to begin. Right? So remember, uh, my friend John Whaley, Johnny Profit, right? He talks about playing the Netflix movie in your mind on your business. So what do you need? What does it look like, right? What does that location look like? How many employees are in there? What kind of products are you selling? What kind of goods or services? What's the feel in there, right? And if you're able to see it, you can identify it and you can start preparing yourself for that outgoing cash flow. All right, so there are industry norms. Now, this is my little secret. Okay, so if we were playing a game and I would be the magician in the middle of the room at this point, all right, and I'd be like, wow, and you'd be like, I don't believe it, Rebecca. That's amazing. Okay, benchmarking. I feel like that's my party trick. Okay, so with benchmarking, you actually get to see what other small business owners in the industry that you're trying to operate are actually doing live on the ground. And that's not just for the big boys, right? What we call public firms. That's for the private firms, the small businesses. So there are tools out there. You can get them through the library, right? They can help you see that. And that's part of my commitment to you going through this program is that I have access to my own benchmarking tools and I'm happy to make those reports available to you. Now you have to tell Paula and Judy, right? And let them know that you want that information, you want that benefit, and I'll go ahead and kind of saddle on up next to you and provide those reports, and then we can talk about them, right? And so that gives you kind of that party trick, that understanding on what businesses are actually achieving in your space. Now, that doesn't mean that you settle for status quo, right? I want you guys to excel. Right, and so part of excelling is knowing what's status quo and then what's reasonable or possible within that. And then again, if you have better processes, if you can get around some of these expenses and think through them, right? You go through your process, you become better than average, then you can improve that. But you got to start somewhere. All right, so research and knowing what your expenses and your options are is critical. And so another tool that we use for that, it's called Reference Source. It used to be called Reference USA. It's now called Data Axle, right? That's a tool you can get off of any library out there. It's just in the reference online reference material, right? It's there. But essentially, you can know what other businesses are paying for their services. Okay. And then you kind of have a way to estimate as a startup what reasonable expenses are. Okay, that doesn't mean you don't try to excel. It just gives you a place to start that's reasonable. But I want you guys to think about certain industry hubs of knowledge. All right, and that's going to be the IBIS World Reports. There's another version of that just came out. It's called Vertical IQ. And so I have access to vertical IQ. So that's something that I can help you with. But that's in the same realm. You're learning about the industry, and you don't just see your one industry, you see the industries that impact your industry, right? You're going one arm length beyond your industry, and you're trying to understand the game players and the outward forces, economic forces that might be playing into your decision making in the future. All right, and then down here in Houston, we have the Greater Houston Partnership forecast. I'm sure there in Dallas, you guys are in one of the most major financial cities in the United States, okay? I know there has got to be some really good forecasting folks over there, economists that are looking at your local environment that are providing industry information on sectors of growth, maybe buildings, residential housing, all those details that might play into the need or demand for your products or good. And that's really important to think about right now. Because TQ, you just nailed it, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what's going to happen in the near future because this whole COVID Delta conversation, right? I guarantee you 6 months ago, we didn't even think that that was going to happen, right? We were all like, we're going to get vaccinated and by Christmas, everything's going to be better, right? We'll be back to normal. And nobody anticipated that. So you need people that are looking at those little details for us to really tip us off ahead of time so that we can be a little bit more prepared. And that's the kind of information you can gain access through local economic groups. All right. And then any type of industry journals. Industry journals exist for everything. Everything. Okay. Like everything. So just try to find some that really speak to you, and you don't have to subscribe and pay a ton of money, but I guarantee you somebody's got that information out there that you can just check into maybe once a month, once a quarter, and just see if there's maybe new innovation or things that are coming up in that conversation. All right, so this is my section about
So it's a little
process.
surprised. It's almost 4 now, right?
Yeah,
And
it's
she
like
didn't.
3 hours
Yeah,
before you really start to digest
yeah,
food.
yeah.
But she may not have had anything else in between.
Don't
then.
think so. She had.
Thank you, TQ. Okay, so process mapping. Here we go. So how will your company operate? All right, process mapping is critical. Okay. Um, when I do my Goldman Sachs 10,000 small business routine, we talk about process mapping, and we do it with a little peanut butter and jelly thing. They tell me how to make a peanut butter and jelly. It's hilarious, okay? Because I'm slapping peanut butter on the bag of the bread, and I'm smushing it all together because they don't tell me to take it out of the bag, okay? So when you are starting out, you're conceptually understanding your cash flow for your business. You have to understand, how are you going to operate? What are the mechanics within the business? Start to finish, what does that look like for the company? Identify those processes that are going to be needed for oversight of expenses. Oh my goodness, it's like nails on a chalkboard for me when I talk to a business owner and they tell me how they were taken advantage of. Either their accountant scammed, or maybe they had an employee that stole from them. Like, I get it, right? Because they're looking at a whole lot of work and they're wearing 20 hats. And so it's so easy for things to get a little crazy. But if you start developing the process and the checkpoints ahead of time, when things start going off the tracks, you're creating like a balance in there, and you can identify when there are problems, right? So this ties back to where we talked about expenses and those scenarios and the worst case expense, right? You can actually help you identify when that business will start running out of money ahead of that actually happening, if you've done a good job with your assumptions, right? So maybe your assumptions say, worst case scenario, you're going to have 20 clients that month, and all of a sudden, 5 days before the end of the month, you've only got 10. Right? Hello, there you go. Worst case scenario, we are in that woods, okay? We're in the woods. We got to figure this out. You should hopefully identify you need money before you get to a point where it actually becomes mission critical and you're going out of business. So think about that. How will your business use money? How will you identify any type of expenses that go beyond that realm, right? Can you improve operations? So there's that party trick, right? The benchmarks. There we go again. I'm pulling them out because guess what? Part of those benchmarks helps us understand those expense limitations, profitability, right? If we start getting into a non-profitable zone, or we start spending too much money outside of what your industry says you should spend, those are areas that you can improve and bring the horse back in to reins, right? You'll be able to understand how to turn things around ahead of it getting out of control. All right, so remember, less outflow means more inflow. Right, so we're in the flow of money, right? So less outflow, less money going out means more inflow coming in. And that's where big businesses like Costco, they do an exceptional job, right? They understand that the cleaner their process is, the better their process is, the less outflow of money, right? They have more concentration on what makes those customers happy and retains those customers, and it makes it easy for them. So remember, you have that same control. It doesn't matter if it's a big business. You can do that or create that as a small business. All right, here's our next check-in point. All right, and we're almost done for today. Here's our check-in point. Know your expenses. Please, please, please know your expenses. Know what is normal outgoing cash flow for your industry, and that is done through the benchmark as well as your research. Identify strong processes for your business operations. Okay, think about it start to finish. What does it look like to the end user? How do you make that better? Right? How do you make communication and streamline it through your business? Does your business look like what you started out envisioning? Right? Are you able to accomplish that? Because at the end of the day, that's the goal, right? And nobody knows how to get there but you, unless you put that down in writing for other people. Okay, so you're going to start building your cash flow with this information. And I know it feels a little awkward. I know, because I just gave you concepts, but I promise you that's why we have each other for a couple more weeks. We're going to start doing this together. But I want you to understand that the forecasting basics say that revenue assumptions, how you're going to make money, right? And remember, breaking it down to day, to week, to month, to year, how you're going to make money minus those expense assumptions, right? Both the fixed and the variable, right? It's it's going to equal your net cash flow. And everybody wants to have money, right? You don't want to be broke. So you want to make sure you have positive net cash flow. That means you have more money coming in that's going out, right? You've got something positive at the end of the day. That's when you know you're somewhat successful. All right, so importance of cash flow forecasting. So forecasting is predicting the future, right? And in a safe and sound researched way, you can predict the future, right? It helps determine a strong plan. Things like investment of time and money will be fruitful. Nobody wants to invest in a business that's going to be a failure, right? And I guarantee you, no business started off thinking they were going to be a failure. It doesn't happen that way. All right. Determine your repayment of startup investment. One of the saddest things I get from business owners is when they come to me years later and they've invested a whole fortune of their family into this business and they're not able to get the money back out. Right? It is so awful. It's gut-wrenching. You don't want to do that. You want to be able to understand how much you're willing to invest and when you expect to receive your initial investment yourself. Because if you're going for outside capital, right, so somebody else is giving you that money to start up, I guarantee you they're going to be asking themselves that same question. When am I going to get my money back? Right? And you're going to answer it to them. You also need to be able to answer it to yourself. Right? So the ability to communicate to investors on the payments that they're going to receive for repayment or dividends is going to be critical. When you understand your cash flow and you forecast it, you can determine when you're able to be able to repay back these folks and communicate that to them. All right, so once you take money from investors, whether it's a bank, it's family, all right, or if it's a separate investor, right, like maybe a venture capitalist, you're going to have to be held accountable to that. So you need to communicate to them. Your forecast is the way that you communicate what it looks like, how much money you're going to need. right? And when you'd be able to repay those funds. So determine the resources you're going to need to be successful. That all happens through understanding the inflow and the outflow of your forecast. Does that sound like a plan? Now you guys know the importance of it. So let's talk about what that looks like. And I know that this is super tiny, so I'm sorry, but you will get a tool that will help you do this. But I want to show you this top portion. This shows you the inflow, right? You would determine from startup position all the way through, let's say the first 12 months is what you're seeing here. You can do this as long as you want, right? Remember, it gets harder to be more accurate the longer the time frame you put out there for forecasting. We don't know what's going to happen next year, right? We could arguably say we don't know what's going to happen next month, okay? But less certain the farther we go. But you got your cash flow inflow, and then you've got your cash flow outflow, right? These are your disbursements. This is your expenses, right? And so the difference allows for us to get the net cash flow. All right, so this is just a quick understanding of written assumptions. Again, it's really tiny, but I want you to understand, just like I said, you're going to go in here and decide what is going to be your revenue assumptions. Right? What's your revenue assumptions? How are you going to make money? How quickly you're going to make money? Right? You're going to do it for each month. Maybe they're going to go incrementally. Maybe there's some seasonal impact. All of that you're going to be thinking about. Are there costs of goods sold associated with this? Right? Maybe not. Right? And then you're going to be thinking about your expense assumptions. What does that look like? What are you going to spend? And you see how you could just literally track through every aspect of what that business is going to look like, what I think is going to happen. And I can guarantee you that if I gave this to an investor and I met my goal, right, that they would understand exactly how I came up with my forecast. And that's what you want to do. You want to leave a nice breadcrumb for that investor to follow to understand how you're going to achieve your goals. All right, now, the power of feedback is huge, right? We all understand that. Getting feedback from customers and clients in the form of surveys, right, or communication is golden. That's how you know how you do better. I want you to take your forecast and get your mentors, your friends, your families, other business owners that you admire, right? Have a look at it. Get them to review it. Well-rounded feedback from others about your forecast is critical, right? They can see things you might not have seen, right? As well as they can come back and tell you whether or not they feel like you're being reasonable. Maybe they're going to come back and tell you can make more money. Or maybe they've got an idea for how you might be able to save money, right? Combined resources, collaboration, all of that becomes possible, but only through the power of feedback. Okay, so I like to end this conversation for this week on a thing that I call things I wish I knew. So I told you that I've got my own business, right? But there's more to that. So I've been in finance for over 25 years. I'm old, by the way. You're seeing it today. But I'm old. Outside of that, I have had multiple businesses from start to exit. All right, and so I'm just going to share some of my wisdom on what I wish my older self would have told my younger self. All right, so hindsight is the knowledge here. Everything always costs more money than and more money and more time, right? It takes twice as much. That has been my my tried and true. So as you're figuring out your expenses and you're thinking about your time frames for ramping up, my advice is to you twice as long, twice as much. Okay. I know that sounds horrible, but it's true. Okay, and people always overestimate their abilities. That's employees that you try to hire, they'll overestimate their abilities. Contractors, right, and customers. All right. So underestimate everybody. That sounds terrible, right? But it's true. It's true, right? And then it's easier to collaborate with other business owners than try to reinvent the wheel. Like that is common sense. There are many ideas I had where I was going to create a new platform or I was going to do something different. Way harder to do, much easier to do if you can identify somebody else in that space that might have energy or time or resources already invested in there for you to be able to collaborate and then come together and come. I'm not saying it has to be that way, but just what I've learned. All right. Always have a plan B. and even a C and D. Because nothing ever ends up the way you think it's going to end up. If it does, good for you. Most of the time, you're having to be very nimble, right? And you're having to figure things out rapidly as things are happening. So just have an idea of how you would do that, kind of formed in your mind before you jump out that door. And then being a business owner is lonely. All right. It is a known fact. All right. So get support from other business owners, family, or friends. But I tell you, one of the magic things about being in a group like this is I want you guys to develop friendships because you're going through the same journey together. And even though you might be in different fields or different areas of business, do not let that stop you from building those friendships because having somebody who has employees or trying to make payroll or struggling with marketing and really gaining a footing, right? Or dealing with, who knows, accounting issues, tax issues. Having somebody else that understands and maybe has been down that road before or going down that road can be extremely helpful. We saw this at its height during COVID when small business owners were struggling and there was a massive amount of support from the business community, helping other business owners get around the issues. All right, so definitely look for others. And with that, we have gotten to the very end. All right, and so I'm going to just ask people whether or not they had any questions or answers. So answers to the question. Anything that you would want to ask before we wrap up for the day?
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much. I think it was such a very thorough and informative session. So I'm very grateful that you had an opportunity to share today. I was just wondering, with the slides, and pardon me, because I came in a bit later, so you might have addressed it already, but will these slides be shared or do you have a condensed version or whichever? Yeah.
We can share the slides, but just want you to know that this is being recorded and we will have it on our YouTube channel.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
In addition to that, TQ, you saw a little tiny glimpse of it, right? That cash flow projection. So I'll make sure that that template is sent out to the group so that as we are talking about cash flow projection, as you're doing your homework, right? Your assumptions, your guesses for both your revenue and your expenses, that you'll have a place to put that information in. So by the end of this journey together, at the end of this 3 weeks, you'll pretty much have a completed cash flow projection and you'll be able to have a game plan for the money.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. And thanks for playing around. It's way much more fun when you guys jump in and share. And just remember, as we go down, because we're building on this, so if you run into a stumbling block, like you're like, I don't know. I don't know what to anticipate, or I'm feeling uncomfortable about my numbers. Remember, if you share it in the group, right, we've got all of this additional insight, that diversity conversation happening. We have diverse understandings of business. We can pull it together and maybe answer some questions.
That is so true because everybody has their own strengths. Even among our team, every one of us has a different strength, a different superpower. And it is so good to be able to network, to work together, collaborate, and take advantage of those. I would not know how to shoot a movie, but Brett does. So I'll just ask Brett.
You know, in the last time I delivered this class, it was so cool. There was a gentleman, his name was Frank, and he owned a coffee shop and he was struggling. He wasn't able to get it to be profitable and he was so upset. And ironically, one of these other little ladies, Anna, I believe, she had a logistics company. And it was so cool. We got to like that third session where we're pulling it all together. And Frank's like, this has all been great, but I still am losing money. And then Anna jumped in and she's like, Frank, I've heard you. And she remembered exactly what his pain points are. Have you ever thought about changing an aspect of his delivery. And you should have seen his face. It just kind of, he's like, oh my God, that saves me not only costs, but it saved him so much headache and having to pay employees. And he's like, just for that one piece of it, and it never came from me. All right, it never came from me. That was like so worth it. It saved him tons of money. But it's because he was able to be in a format he was able to share and have other insight.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. Anybody else want to share something other than how wonderful Rebecca is? Well, you could do that too.
I have something I'd kind of like to ask her. And yes, Rebecca's wonderful every time. That's why we love it, because it's just much easier to break it down, because most of us get terrified for big numbers, and you just make it look like it's just one number. It may have 15 others beside it, but it's just one. And speaking of that, what if somebody is trying to start a new business and they have an end goal, which represents a very large amount of money to accomplish that goal or dream, if you will. And they're trying to figure out how to ramp up to get to where their revenue stream is going to equal that. Uh-oh, she's giving me this. Good. So
Yes.
how do they actually think that through? Because I deal with helping people with their new businesses. I also have my own same thing, making movies, you said. Well, compete with Hollywood. But there are other options, right? And so I'm just curious, how do you respond to that as far as
Yeah, okay, so that's actually part of next week's conversation. And so I'll kind of go into it and we'll connect it next week. But there is what we call activities, right? That's your assumptions. That's what you got to do, right? That's how many times you got to sell that widget in order to make X amount of money. So we're kind of conceptualizing right now. But then there's what we call milestones. So there's activities and milestones. So milestones are those big things that you have to accomplish. And when you accomplish that, you can almost like jump, right? I think of like Mario Super Brothers, right? You're on one level and you're like, hold on, I got to jump off of that onto the next level. That's your milestone. And so your milestone can look different to different businesses. But just to Brett's point, let's say we know that to compete with Hollywood, we have to have a blockbuster movie, or maybe we have to have a movie play at Sundance, right? Okay, so we get here and we know that when we get to Sundance, right? We can get up to here. We can get bigger attention to us, maybe a bigger budget. We can have more people. And when we get to here, right, then we might get in, blank movies theaters or something. We might be picked up. I don't know what that looks like, right? You'd have to help me. But maybe we can get picked up by, a major, you know, company. Okay. So the
distributors?
goal is to get here. Right. So we got to be here to get here. But we know that there's going to be those middle steps. That's your milestones. And so like you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So what is going to be my set of assumptions, activities to get me to here? Right. And when I get here, what are going to be my activities and assumptions to get to me here? You're going to have growth steps. We got to start small, but we will catapult to where we want to go. We just have to identify that. We have to make that clear in our communication. So as a leader, you're going to want to tell your employees what the goal is, right? And that goal might be Sundance win, right? And then that goal is going to change as time moves, right? But your threshold for activities is going to be different each time. You just need to be able to communicate that to the team that's collecting all their energy, right? And helping us achieve and move up through the ranks to accomplish the final goal. Yes. Good question. Any
I think
more?
it was an excellent question because I, you see those goals, and like Brett said, okay, he's competing with Hollywood. Okay, that is so big a goal that I'm afraid I would go, ain't happening. I'm gonna go back to my McDonald's job. So, um, so it just seems like such a leap. But if you take those small steps and create those goals, those milestones. I can understand that.
You know, the other day I was in Las Vegas. I'm just starting
Oh,
off in a random conversation. No, it actually goes to what Paula was saying. Okay. And Tony Hesh, and there's a lot about Tony Hesh, but he had such an impact there with Zappos. And I went and I visited. He like built this whole little like shopping center around shipping containers, like refurbished shipping. It's very
mhm.
interesting. All right, very interesting down there. But I was just touring what he was doing, and he's really known for biting off really large goals, right? That seem really scary and seem like it's really beyond what you could do. But he was a master at getting people excited on a small level, right? Like leading them in a way where it made sense, one cell at a time, right? One day at a time. And I think when you have the ability as a leader to make it clear what you're trying to accomplish, so maybe, movie theaters is where you want to be, right? As long as you can clearly define it and get everybody to collectively be on your side and to see themselves accomplishing that goal, like that's the leadership aspect. And so, what I'm asking you guys to do here is to paint that picture of where you're trying to take that business, right? Like, what is that vision? Right? And then make it digestible where other people can see the same vision, right? Or maybe even not just see your vision, but help you build and expand and make it better, right? Because if you can collectively get the energy on it and communicate what needs to happen, then you have a better chance of accomplishing it, right? You're just essentially, I'm telling you, set your parameters, right? Set your filters for what that looks like. Envision it so others can see it. Investors, employees, spouses, they're important too, right? They got to support you.
And it also helps to surround yourself with people that are receptive to that, as well as talented in some areas that they can accomplish, or they can lead a secondary group or something. Everybody working together to meet that goal.
Exactly. I think that's where the magic happens.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you recognize it. You can see it. You can feel there's something different there because there is that collective understanding what needs to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to your point, um, Joel, whenever you go into Costco, I feel that way, right? It's very orderly. It's very structured. They're going to tell me exactly where I need to be, right? Like it's people are happy to be there. I have not met a single Costco employee that was rude to me. Not once. Right? Like it's always a very consistent experience when I come in. They're all very happy and helpful and it's nice. It's welcoming. But that only comes from that shared vision. And if you go back and actually follow the Costco story, right? It was a startup just like any other startup. It was out of box idea and what is it? One of the original founders, I think he just passed away, if I remember correctly, but he would still like, I mean, he was really old and he would jump on a plane and drive over or fly to wherever Costco and individually just work with the team. But again, it was like he was sharing that vision, that same vision over and over again, helping the newer generations understand.
Mm-hmm.
Can I
They
go back?
are. Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just thinking, thank you for sharing, everybody. It's like I'm thinking about it as it relates to maybe just different business prospects that I have in mind. But I just wanted to revisit very quickly the idea of cash flow. And I was wondering, as we talk about our assumptions and when I look financially, because that's probably an area that I struggle in, that I need to be a little bit more attentive to, I would say. So when we talk about cash flow and you're looking at maybe assumptions regarding our expenditures, is it realistic to include the idea of investors in there or no?
Oh,
Because it's more,
yeah.
yeah, what are your thoughts?
I love that idea. So definitely, if you're going to take private investment or any investment money, whether it be a bank, a VC, right? And we're going to talk about this next week, but I love this conversation. I'm just going to jump in and start to try to answer it. So you want to know clearly what they want out of the deal, right? So before you even go to anybody, right? This is kind of like you're cracking this vision yourself. You're defining what would be an acceptable form of investment for you, or how you would compensate or pay back somebody for borrowing their money to achieve this goal, right? You're gonna start to identify what that relationship looks like for you. Because investment money looks all different kinds of way. I'm going to tell you, I've seen all kinds of things, right? Creative things, crazy things, bad things. It can look all different ways. But when you start understanding how you're going to use somebody's money to be able to build the business and to essentially take somebody's assets and start generating more assets. So for every dollar you're borrowing, right, maybe you're creating $2 so that you can quickly pay them back their dollar and own the business, right? And again, you could, maybe that's not your goal. Maybe you want to partner up with somebody and then they'll always get a portion of the revenue, whatever that looks like for you. You do want to understand how that money is going to come into the business. That's incoming cash flow, right? How that money is going to generate more assets, right? Kind of build almost like a snowball going down a hill. It's going to start building, and how quickly you're going to be paying back that money. So that outflow, how quickly you're going to pay it back. Now, when you're trying to understand that, you're going to be looking at the first year to 2 years worth of incoming and outgoing cash flow. And you're going to be looking at that net income. And you'll see that as we start working with the template going forward. You'll start seeing where if you're accomplishing your assumptions, both the revenue and expense assumptions, and you're actually generating a profit, you can start getting comfortable as a leader on when and how you pay back or you know, take back that money to those investors, right? But it's kind of getting your game plan and understanding your assumptions from a realistic standpoint that allows you the comfort for being able to name your terms, right? I feel like if you are just going into a conversation with investors ahead of understanding your cash flow and what you're trying to create, like you could get it all wrong and it could be a horrible mess, right? It's that peanut butter and jelly sandwich that I'm just like putting the peanut butter on the plastic, and you don't know what you're going to get if you're just naming your pricing ahead of understanding what is actual, what you feel comfortable with revenue.
Perfect, thank you. So in my like in my analysis, then I would include that because I still have to learn about investors and everything. But I guess I would include that as an unstable variable, I guess, because investors can pull out, right? Or
Not necessarily. It depends. Some
oh, okay.
investors could. It depends on your terms. So they have what they call convertible notes. So that's probably what you're
Uh,
thinking about.
yes,
But
yes.
it looks different. So if you have a convertible note, an investor could say, I just want shares, or I do want to convert this into a long-term debt for you to pay me back, right? So they could look at it. It could be up in the air until another future point in time, like another milestone, let's say, that allows for them to make that decision. Right. They could say, keep my money for a year. Don't pay me anything. At the end of the year, let's see what the business is doing, right? And whether or not I'll be given the option to cash out, like you buy me back, or you pay back the investor all the money they borrowed plus maybe a little extra, right? And then they go away, or they could become a lender. Like that's part of your unique situation based on what you believe is going to happen, and then how you would handle that investor.
Nice. Thank you very much.
Hmm. Yeah, there's all different kinds of way to skin a cat in this world. So
Well, Rebecca, as always, you have just delivered some valuable content. We really appreciate it. And I just want to let everyone know you are going to be receiving a survey. And please complete those surveys and send them back. It will be just valuable information for us so that we can know how we can continue to best serve our client base and anyone that wants to participate in our webinars. We use that data to make sure that we're providing the right topics. Just want to talk about the rest or some of our upcoming webinars. Tomorrow, a great one, 10 mistakes hackers want you to make, presented by Eric Spellman. I wouldn't miss that if I were y'all. It's going to be pretty good. And then next week, we have part 2 of Money Smart for Startup Businesses. After that, the next day on the 25th, How to Get Knockout Testimonials, presented by Ashley Cook. And on the 31st, part 3 of Money Smart by the illustrious Rebecca Schultz. And then I'm not sure if I can actually wrap my head around this, but we're talking September 6th. September, wow. Rebecca comes back, going to start a new series, Creating a Bankable Loan Proposal. This is part 1. It's amazing that it's almost September. If you want to find out any more information about our upcoming webinars, we've got a whole bunch more scheduled out through October, November. You can just access our website at www.sbdc.nctc.edu, or we have our QR code up there on the screen there. Just take a picture of it. You can use that to go straight to our website where you can register for the webinars. You can get contact information. You can set up an appointment with an advisor. You can get all sorts of resources for small businesses. Plus, you can use one of our new pieces of information on there. It's called Size Up. You can go in yourself and you can get a lot of business information, industry information. You can get a list of competitors. You can get financial data on the industry as well as the area. Just lots of information available to you just by accessing the website. We want to thank everybody that made all of this possible. These are our benefactors that actually pay the bills for us. I want to thank the Small Business Administration, the state of Texas, North Texas SBDC Regional Office in Dallas, and our host, North Central Texas College. Thank you all for joining us. Be sure and come back tomorrow for a lesson on hacking or hackers. And we're going to end the webinar today, and thank you all for joining us.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.